After what seemed like an eternity, the Seahawks have a new offensive coordinator, but did they make the right hire? We're going to be breaking it all down here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, here on our Monday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, whether you're tuning in from Sumner, Washington, or East Chicago, Indiana. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks finally have a new offensive coordinator. We're going to be taking a deep dive into the decision to hire Klint Kubiak and what that means for Seattle's offense heading into 2025. Plus, it's Senior Bowl week. We're going to kick off our preview with some Fab Five offensive players to watch this week in Mobile. This episode's brought your way by our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. In the middle of the AFC Championship game, the Seahawks announced their brand new offensive coordinator. It's a little different than last year when Ryan Grubb was spotted at Dino's with John Schneider and Mike McDonald. This time around, very under the rug, just trying to see if they could sneak it through the news cycle. But Klint Kubiak getting handed the keys to Seattle's offense. And Rob, for a good chunk of this process, Klint Kubiak seemed to be the favorite. He was the first coordinator candidate that got 2 interviews with the Seahawks. And then there was the flirtation with Hank Fraley, which, based on what I've heard, it sounds like they were legitimately interested in trying to make that work. But ultimately, the two sides just didn't see eye to eye on enough things for this to be worth Fraley's time to come to Seattle. They were still very interested in Klint Kubiak. And the stars align. Now Klint Kubiak, with his 5th team in 5 years, he is a nomad coach. He's been all over the place, but everywhere he's gone, particularly the quarterback position, he has left a positive imprint on the franchises he's coached for. You're muted, Rob.
Yeah, there's no question about it, Corbin. I think that with Klint Kubiak, this is a spectacular hire. This is, as you said, was basically the favorite going in. I think that there's an awful lot of longtime Seahawks fans out there that maybe just have a little bit of negativity towards the idea. This is Klint Kubiak, of course, the son of Gary Kubiak, longtime Denver Broncos guy. And so maybe there is some of the hostility against him, the way that there was maybe some hostility against a name like, say, a Chip Kelly, previously because of his ties with the University of Oregon. I think you got to throw all that stuff out the window. And instead, look at what Klint Kubiak has done. When he has had healthy, good players, his offenses have been very, very successful in the passing game, in the running game, the development of offensive linemen, development of young quarterbacks, using a variety of different skill position, pass catchers, tight ends, wide receivers, big, small, short, fast, quick. So to me, that's very intriguing. I really like the fact that this is basically, at least in my mind, is an acknowledgement of just the kind of the old philosophy that if you can't beat them, then join them. You go back and you look at what the Seahawks have done here. They are getting a coach who has experience with Kyle Shanahan, of course, with the San Francisco 49ers. The Seahawks are expected to keep Jake Peetz, who has experience with Sean McVay. So just given how successful those two offenses are in the NFC West, Seattle is kind of stealing parts from both of them. I don't think that is that's something to be kind of scoffed at. I think that is an acknowledgement again about, look, those two organizations are very, very successful in moving the football almost regardless of who is taking the snaps at quarterback or who the quarterbacks are passing the ball or handing the ball off to. Just the success speaks for itself. To me, when you look at what Klint Kubiak has been able to do, and I'll go back to these last two stops here with the San Francisco 49ers, New Orleans Saints, and actually even the Denver Broncos as well. again, to me, I've been fortunate enough, Corbin. I was at the Saints training camp this past summer. I was at the Denver Broncos training camp the last couple of years. I'm not going to, I haven't had one-on-one conversations with Kubiak, but I have talked to players, coaches, scouts that have raved about Klint Kubiak and his preparation. I really think that this is exactly the type of the hire the Seahawks wanted, because I think that he is somebody who is going to mesh in very nicely with Mike Macdonald, has some, head coaching potential to him, but at the same time is not a guy that I think that if Seattle, suddenly shoots up and is one of the 10 best offenses in the NFL next year, that you necessarily have to worry that Klint Kubiak is going to get pried away as a head coaching candidate. I think, again, that is something that Seattle is prioritizing as well. And so, again, I think that this is a hire that Seahawks fans should be very excited about. And I feel very confident that this makes it that much more likely that Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, just because of the way that their game translates, I believe, into Klint Kubiak's offense, that very likely that Geno Smith and DK Metcalf are going to be in Seattle for a long time.
Yeah, I think the biggest winner, and I wrote an article today on Seahawks on SI about this, I think the biggest benefactor of this hire is Geno Smith. I don't think that Mike Macdonald and John Schneider could have made a more emphatic statement that they wanted to have somebody that could really work with Geno Smith in the final year of his contract, or if he has an extension. Klint Kubiak, if you look at the track record, Rob, I put this together today. He has had 4 different quarterbacks that he's worked with in the last 6 years. In the 3 years he was with Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, Cousins was in the top 10 in almost every significant category in all 3 of those seasons. He finished in the top 10 in touchdown passes 3 times in 3 years. Top 3 in passing yards, 2 of those 3. Top 3 in yards per attempt. So it's not just dink and dunk. We're going to take our shots. Top 3 in QB rating in all those seasons. The 1 year with Russell Wilson, that was just a nightmare season for that entire Broncos coaching staff. I don't think you can blame that on Kubiak for Russell Wilson's struggles. It was just a mess from the beginning, and Nathaniel Hackett got fired by week 15 because of it. He goes to San Francisco as a passing game coordinator, and all Brock Purdy does is finish 5th in passing yards, 3rd in touchdown passes, 4th in completion rate, and 1st in yards per attempt and quarterback rating. And last year, Derek Carr, he missed 7 games. But he was still in the top 10 in completion rate, yards per attempt, sack rate, and quarterback rate. That should excite Seahawks fans because you're looking at a lengthy, consistent track record of coaching different quarterbacks at different trajectories in their career. Kirk Cousins was past his prime for part of that chunk. And then you've got Brock Purdy. He was a sophomore. He was in his 2nd season in the NFL. And the huge jump that he took with Kubiak as the passing game coordinator. And then last year, Derek Carr, I just mentioned the number of stats that if you're looking at a per attempt basis, he was as good as any quarterback in the NFL. He threw 15 touchdowns and 5 picks. Unfortunately, he couldn't stay healthy and he missed 7 games. That was the story of the Saints season. You just look at that 6-year track record, and this guy has done a fantastic job coaching quarterbacks. And the fact of the matter is, Geno Smith has way more in common with Kirk Cousins, Brock Purdy, and Derek Carr than he does with Russell Wilson in terms of skill set. So I think Klint Kubiak, it was probably an easy sell. Hey, you're going to get to work with Geno Smith. Well, look at the success I had with Kirk Cousins. I think he's going to be really excited. And oh, by the way, receivers have done really well with him. Justin Jefferson over 1,600 yards in 2021. This past season, if Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed did not get hurt, they were both on pace for 1,000-yard seasons before they had injuries. Both of them were. And Juwan Johnson had over 500 receiving yards this past season. So Noah Fant and A.J. Barner should be excited about the prospects. Look, I'm not going to say it's a picture-perfect hire. I think there's certainly some reasons for maybe a little skepticism, but this is a guy that you and I have been high on this entire process for a reason. And oh, by the way, he's only 37 years old, and he's a football nerd. I think he and Mike Macdonald, I guarantee they hit it off during their interview process because they think the same way about this sport.
Yeah, and I love that you just said that and how they think the same way. I think if they think the same way, not only about the sport, but I think about a lot of things. I was able to view a quick kind of introductory interview with Klint Kubiak while he was working with the Denver Broncos a couple of years ago. And one of the questions I thought was kind of fascinating was they asked him about his philosophy as a coach. And he gave 3 different points that I think that will basically make an awful lot of sense, and I think allow Seahawks fans to understand why he and Mike McDowell might basically be kind of a really nice pairing. What Klint Kubiak, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically he said that he believes in the process over results. So he's a teacher. He's somebody that is going to be, focusing on the process to make sure that you get the results. He's not going to accept a player who is an unbelievable talent, makes one splashy play, but isn't doing it the right way. He wants it to be done a certain way. Again, I think that's going to fit in with Mike McDowell. Stresses the accountability. When you consider some of the silly, prior to the pre-snap penalties, the lack of players in motion and things like that, what we saw from the Seahawks this past season, I think that you are going to see the accountability factor come back into play and see how be a little bit more creative, and also be able to play different types of players based on who is actually performing up to par in practice, not just who is making the most money, for example. And then finally, make practice a little bit stressful for players. And I love that you use that term, make practice stressful for players. That's going to make the game easier. Corbin, it's easy to draw up things on a whiteboard or to run a practice. But again, having gone to a couple of Klint Kubiak's practices over the last couple of years in training camp, one of the things I was so impressed with is just how they would teach their fundamentals, how they would get meaningful snaps for their second, third, and fourth string players, because you knew the injuries are going to take place. And so that's one of the reasons why a guy like a Spencer Rattler, as a rookie, was able to make some splashy plays, keep New Orleans competitive in some of those games, even after New Orleans had the huge rash of injuries that they had.
Yeah, you make a lot of really good points there with all the injuries that they had and the fact that this team was competitive down the stretch in New Orleans. I know they weren't winning a lot of those games, but they almost knocked Tampa Bay out of the playoffs in Week 18. Spencer Rattler was playing better the last few weeks. I mean, you saw improvements, you saw growth, you saw these guys taking to the teaching, and I think those are things Mike McDonald was gravitated to during this process. And so now we're going to have to wait and see. It's going to be a while until Klint Kubiak gets to be on the field, but now we get to see how the personnel adjustments are going to be made in terms of who's going to be back, who they're going to bring in to work with Klint Kubiak. But they've got their offensive coordinator. The rest of the staff's going to start coming together as well. Going to be interesting to see what other dominoes fall here in the next few weeks. When we come back, I just mentioned the tight ends could be an interesting fit with Klint Kubiak. But before we get to 2025, we got to look back at 2024. Noah Fant, AJ Barner and company will have our report cards for the tight end positions coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get into the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. As we continue our postseason grade card, it's time to flip over to the tight end spot. And Rob, this was a position that we had some significant questions about going into the year because Will Dissly's gone. Colby Parkinson is gone. They did re-sign Noah Fant. You've got a rookie in AJ Barner and a veteran Pharaoh Brown coming in, trying to fill the gaps left behind by Dissly and Parkinson. There were some uncertainties about what this position group was going to look like this year. And I think that there was some general optimism coming into the regular season. Oddly enough, though, the free agent addition in Pharaoh Brown, that didn't make the splash that I think the Seahawks thought it was going to, especially in the run blocking department. But of all the tight ends, AJ Barner was the most consistent from this group. And that gives you a lot of positivity about the future when you got a fourth-round pick that comes in a rookie and catches 4 touchdown passes.
Yeah, no question about it. As you said, I mean, there was some optimism and maybe some questions, I think, from some about how Seattle's tight ends were going to fare. I think that when you looked at what Ryan Grubb was able to do with the tight ends that he had with the Huskies, at least that was some of the reason why I was excited. I really thought that Noah Fant possessed a similar kind of a size speed metric as what Devin Culp possessed for the Huskies a year ago. And I really thought that Brady Russell was basically Jack Westover, except in a at the pro level. And of course, Seattle brought in Jack Westover, as an undrafted free agent. So I was excited about what Seattle's tight ends were going to be able to produce. I'm just stunned by the fact that AJ Barner wound up catching 4 touchdowns and Noah Fant only caught 1. That, of course, was a big one, but it was at the very, very end of the season. And for Noah Fant to go the entire year catching 48 passes for 500 yards and only the single touchdown, then basically he kind of personifies the grade that I gave the Seahawks tight ends. I gave Noah Fant a B-, and I'm going to give this group as a whole a C. I thought that Noah Fant's athleticism and size, his soft hands, I think there's just, it leaves you wanting a little bit more. I think that he is an above average starting tight end in the NFL, but not the exceptional one. That, a player who was selected in the first round of those years ago by the Denver Broncos, that frankly, I think that he should be at this point. He's still a young man. He just turned 27 in November. So again, this is a player that I still feel like has a great deal of untapped potential to him. And speaking of untapped potential, again, with AJ Barner, to me, he was the player that got the highest grade for me among Seattle tight ends. Again, A-, and it's not that he was perfect. I mean, there definitely were some misfires, some silly penalties and a couple drop balls on his side as well. But at the same time, I just thought that he played with a physicality that, frankly, I thought that a lot of Seattle's other pass catchers did not show. Some competitiveness, some willingness to go through and around would-be tacklers to try to create after the catch. And so, again, I was really excited about Seattle's first-year tight end, A.J. Barner. Pharaoh Brown, I wasn't a big fan of the move in the first place. I just think that he is basically fairly slow moving and never has demonstrated great hands. He can move some people in the line of scrimmage, but I didn't think that he did so at such a high level. He is a free agent. I would be surprised if he is brought back by the Seahawks. And then finally, Brady Russell. I mean, look, I gave Brady Russell a C+, and I know that it's hard to defend that, with considering that he caught 0 passes for the Seahawks this past season. But he played in 11 games. Corbin, he had 10 tackles on special teams during that time. And I do think that his ability on special teams, his ability as a move tight end, that is something that Seattle should try to exploit a little bit more often in 2025.
Yeah, as far as grades go for me, the entire group, I'm giving a C+. I gave AJ Barner a B because the blocking was not as consistent as I thought it was going to be. It's odd. He was better in the passing game, catching passes, than he was as a run blocker. And I thought as the season progressed, he got better there. But it seemed like it was more of a jump in that regard than I thought it was going to be for him. With him coming from Michigan's offense, how important he was in their success winning a national championship, how much they ran the football. So it was kind of an odd rookie year, but it ended up being a really solid one for him. I'm going to give Noah Fant a C just because, again, he almost went through 2 full seasons without scoring a touchdown, if not for that touchdown at the end of that season finale against the Rams. I mean, 2 full years. At some point, yeah, you can say there's, victim of circumstance, things of that nature. But when you are a tight end with that kind of athletic ability and you've played in pretty much every game, he missed a couple games this year with an injury, but he's been pretty healthy for the most part. To have 1 touchdown in 2 seasons and you're paying him $10 million per year on his contract and he's supposed to be a pass catching tight end, the production just has not been there. And I didn't think he was quite as good run blocking as he was the season prior, where we saw some improvements compared to earlier in his career. So I think that Noah Fant, with the contract he gave him, it was an underwhelming season. Pharaoh Brown, I'm giving a D-. I thought he had a really rough season, and I don't know that he was ever healthy. I think that foot injury he suffered in training camp during their joint practices, I just felt like he never looked the same after that. And he had almost as many holding penalties as he did receptions. He struggled in the run blocking department when he was one of the best in the NFL for a tight end in the previous couple seasons. It just didn't come together. And Brady Russell, the tackles are nice. Didn't really play much on offense, had some injuries. I'm just going to give him a flat C. But for me, this group is a C+, mainly because A.J. Barner is carrying this group with that B grade. But I think a solid C to C+ range. I don't think it was the worst position group on the roster, but there certainly was some room for improvement, especially from somebody like Noah Fant, who's an established veteran that you are paying to be making those kind of plays.
Yeah, no question about it. And I will say this, again, we're assigning these grades based on what they did in a Seahawks uniform in 2024. But I think now that we know that Klint Kubiak is going to be the offensive coordinator for 2025, I think it's easy to project some improvement for Seattle's tight ends in Klint Kubiak's system. You just go back to the way that they have used their tight ends in Denver and Minnesota, San Francisco, and in New Orleans. You mentioned Juwan Johnson. Obviously, Taysom Hill, of course, is a do-it-all type of a player that the Saints sometimes use as a traditional tight end. But again, Kubiak is coming from schemes that you take advantage of their tight ends. I do believe that Seattle has athleticism at that position. And then also the fact that I expect there to be an awful lot more play-action passing. And again, to me, when it talks about play-action, obviously everybody who likes to think about the big, deep bombs over the top to a DK Metcalf or a Tyler Lockett or whatever. I just want some play action over the top of the linebackers that are sucking up to kind of going close to try and slow down the running game and really start to control the middle of the field. That is something that I've watched Seattle's defenders get eaten alive at times over the last several seasons. I'd like to see Seattle's offense do some of the eating with their tight ends during that same way.
When we come back, we are going to shift our attention to Senior Bowl week in Mobile, Alabama. We're going to talk offensive prospects, really our first draft crushes of the offseason. We'll be looking at 5 players apiece that we're going to be watching on the offensive side of the ball in Mobile. That's coming up next year on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Here's how it works. LinkedIn's new features can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be teaming up with my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It's time to start shifting our focus slowly towards the NFL draft. And as they like to say, the draft starts in Mobile every year with the Senior Bowl. And it's interesting, Rob, it feels like this year some of the other bowl games, some of the other all-star showcases have been able to maybe even up the ground just a little bit in terms of some of the big names they're bringing in. But at the end of the day, the Senior Bowl is still the granddaddy of them all. And there's a ton of really exciting prospects that Jim Nagy has brought in. He and his staff have brought in. They're going to be participating this week in Mobile to preview everything that's going to go down this week at the Senior Bowl. Rob, it's time for us to start dishing out some of our draft crushes. And I know that there is a quarterback that you're going to be watching this week. One that I'm very surprised that we just found out has really small hands.
Yeah, well, Jalen Milroe, I don't care how small his hands are. To me, what this is all about is the velocity in his arm and then just the power and speed of his legs. I just think that dual threat quarterbacks now are just not only the wave of the future in the NFL, they're the wave of the present. You consider the quarterbacks that, we're just playing here in the conference championship games, whether it be Josh Allen and Jaden Daniels, obviously no longer playing. Patrick Mahomes, I think, you see his mobility. And then obviously with Jalen Hurts. I mean, to me, that is just a function of the reality of today's NFL, is that I think there's going to be more and more NFL teams who are going to be willing to sacrifice a little of the anticipation and the just pure accuracy as a pocket passer if that quarterback can move his feet and just create something. And to me, there's no question about Jalen Monroe in terms of just pure physical talent. He is the most gifted quarterback in this draft class. Look, all due respect to Shedeur Sanders, who is playing at the East-West Shrine Bowl. As you mentioned, there are some other games out there that are, luring some talent to their games. Cam Ward from Miami previously, and Incarnate Wood in Washington State, of course, is opting not to participate in any of these all-star games. To me, every eye in Mobile for the Senior Bowl is going to be paying an awful lot of attention to the Alabama quarterback, Jalen Monroe, just because if there is a player who could absolutely seize this opportunity and push himself into early first-round category, Monroe might be that guy.
Yeah, I'm not as high on Milroe as what you are, but maybe it's just a taste thing. I know he's an incredible athlete, but I understand the value of dual threat quarterbacks. I want to look at a guy that's been more consistent throwing the football, though. And for me, that's Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. And the dude lives up to his name. He throws darts, and he's a little bit bigger body. He's a little lean. He's taller, leaner quarterback that ran for over 500 yards each of the last 3 years, has 12 rushing touchdowns during that time. So you've got the dual threat capabilities, but maybe the most underrated part about Jackson Dart's game, he was the most prolific deep ball passer in college football this year. 17 touchdown passes that traveled 20 or more yards through the air. That's the most of any quarterback in the NFL. Now, there are some things that jump out to me that I need to see improvement from at the Senior Bowl. The anticipation, being able to throw receivers open. He can get locked on a receiver and struggle going through his progressions. You can't do that in the NFL. He's got to show growth in that regard. But this is a guy that completed nearly 70% of his passes this year. He's accurate. He can throw the ball downfield. He's athletic. And this dude's tough. He's taken some big hits the last couple of years. I don't know if he sneaks into the first round like some people are talking about, but I think Jackson Dart is another one that could make himself that kind of money and raise his stock that way this week in Mobile.
Yeah, no question about it. And the same kind of questions are going to follow Milroe, are going to follow Dart. Can Milroe have more success in an offense that is a little bit more of a pro style than what he ran with Kalen DeBoer this past year in Tuscaloosa? Can Jackson Dart prove that he is one of the few quarterbacks who can have as much success outside of Lane Kiffin's offense as he had in Oxford, Mississippi? And that to me is going to be fascinating here. Let's talk about some of the wide receivers. And Corbin, I know that there's a lot of Locked On Seahawks fans, and thank you so very much for listening and watching as always. But I know there's a lot of our listeners who are very eager to be talking about offensive linemen. I'm going to ask you to hold off for a second, and I'll explain why. I think that wide receiver is very much a sneaky need for this club. I would be surprised if Tyler Lockett is back with the Seahawks, at least in a starting caliber role this upcoming season. I just didn't see much, big play ability. And so that's why I'm going to focus in on two wide receivers here that I don't think a lot of people are talking about just yet, but I do think that a splashy performance in Mobile this week could very much put them on a lot of clubs' radar. I'm going to start off with Jack Besh. Now, Jack Besh, his last name is spelled B-E-C-H, but it's pronounced Besh. He's 6'2", 215 pounds. He was a 4-star recruit at LSU and then wound up transferring to TCU this past season. And he was absolutely spectacular. 62 grabs, then 1,034 yards and 9 touchdowns. Corbin, this is a guy who won 5 state titles playing in the state of Louisiana in basketball and football. And you can see his athletic ability in the way that he uses his body basically to box out defenders, be able to take catches, and then burrow his head down and be able to use that 6'2", 215 pounds to break tackles, to be able to elude people. He is my favorite receiver that nobody seems to be talking about right now. I think, again, that he's going to have a splashy week in Mobile. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Jalen Lane from Virginia Tech. Now, he also is a transfer. He was at Middle Tennessee State a couple of years ago, but made the switch to Virginia Tech. And if the Hokies had any type of a reasonably productive passing game, then I really think that Jalen Lane might be a household name at this point. I mean, because of his ability to make people miss. He's the type of player that Tyler Lockett once was, as far as being able to create after the catch. But there were so many passes where Tyler Lockett would catch the ball and basically just kind of fall to the turf. That is the exact opposite of what Jalen Lane is. To me, he is a big play waiting to happen. He is one of only 4 players in ACC recent history, the past 20 years. I guess I should say that's not recent history, but the past 20 years to be able to score a touchdown as a thrower, as a runner, as a receiver, and as a return man. And it's that type of big play ability that I think the Seahawks, frankly, have been lacking at the wide receiver position. So to me, in more in that middle rounds, the 5'10", 186 speedster Jalen Lane from Virginia Tech is somebody I think Seahawks fans should very much be paying attention to in the Senior Bowl practices this week.
And I promised 12s. We're going to talk about some of the buffet bashers here in a minute. We'll get to the offensive linemen here in a moment. But I got a couple skill guys that I want to talk about too. And I don't think running back is a significant need at all for the Seattle Seahawks. But Rob, you and I know that John Schneider is always looking to see, is there a guy I can draft at that position? Because there's never too much depth in the backfield. And I think a guy on day 3 that John Schneider and Mike McDonald would both love is Devin Neal from Kansas. This kid averaged 3.73 yards per carry after contact for the Jayhawks last year. And in the Colorado game, he had over 30 carries. Like, this guy's got the traditional, 1980s, 1990s workhorse DNA. He is hard-nosed. He breaks a lot of tackles, and he'll surprise you with his explosiveness. He's probably not going to be one of the elite testers at the running back position, but he had 17 runs this year on design runs of 15-plus yards, according to Pro Football Focus. So he's got more juice than people realize. Not the most explosive receiver, but he caught 70-something passes in his college career. More of a traditional out-of-the-backfield dump-off type guy, but there's pass protection ability. He's tough. He's a guy that was a leader in the locker room. So I have a lot of excitement about seeing how Devin Neal stacks up in what might be the best running back class we've seen in the last 15 years. It's that deep. And then at the receiver position, you mentioned 2 names. I'm going to go to Pat Bryant of Illinois. And this is a kid. This is something I look for with college programs. Did you put the production up as a byproduct of the offense you were in, or did you put it up in spite of the offense you were in? And I think Pat Bryant is a great example of somebody that put up big numbers in spite of the offense he's in. Illinois is not a run and gun, chuck it downfield type of offense. They love to run the football. That's Brett Bielema's MO. But Pat Bryant had over 18 yards per reception this year. He had 6 touchdowns, tied for 5th most in the country, of 20-plus yards traveling through the air. This guy is a big play waiting to happen. He's 6'3", almost 200 pounds. He's got big size. He is able to win contested catches. That would be my biggest question mark. Is he going to be able to create the separation against top-level guys that are NFL corners? Is he going to be able to create the separation, or are we looking at another example of, say, an N'Keal Harry, who in the NFL could not create that separation to make those big plays? I'm not concerned about that. I think this kid is going to make himself a lot of money this week in Mobile.
Well, and I'll give you another guy who's going to make himself some money if he can prove his versatility, as I think that he will. And that is my favorite offensive lineman at the Senior Bowl this year, Armand Membo. Now, it's kind of funny to call this the Senior Bowl because Membo is a junior and he's actually only 20 years old. He will turn 21 until March. He's 6'3", he's 315, 320 pounds, and he has been the starting right tackle at Missouri the last couple of years. Now, of course, that's going up against SEC competition. And so the Senior Bowl to me is more about where Membo is going to be viewed by NFL teams as far as where he is going to play. I think, again, 6'3", 315 pounds, he is likely to slide inside a guard. A lot of college tackles struggle with that because, of course, it's much closer contact. They struggle with the additional physicality of that. I don't think that's going to be the problem with Membo. He is one of the most physical players in this entire draft class. He is incredibly athletic, too. For a short, squatty kind of a frame, he is really, really light on his feet, can move around in space. I think that he is one of the better blockers when it comes to recognizing twists and stunts and adjusting accordingly. For a guy who is as young as he is, Membao to me screams future first-round selection. I think that he is somebody that could be in play for the Seahawks at number 18 overall. And I love, again, the positional versatility. I know that everybody wants to focus on the Seahawks and the interior offensive line. I think the tackle is every bit as much of a concern. What happens if something goes down with Charles Cross? What happens if Abraham Lucas is not back? Obviously, you have some developmental talent there, but I don't think that Mike Jarrell, for example, or Stone Forsythe is going to be able to step in and play at a high level. I do believe that Membao has the type of potential to warrant a mid-first round selection. And then finally, this isn't necessarily for the Seahawks, Corbin, but because I know that Seattle has traditionally throughout the John Schneider era has kind of shied away from small school, especially offensive linemen. The aforementioned Jarrell being a little bit of a departure from that, albeit that was obviously a late round selection. But Charles Grant from William & Mary is a really intriguing player. This is one of those guys that I love because he's a former state champion wrestler. He goes to William & Mary, 6'4", 300 pounds. A lot of people didn't think that he would bulk up to become as big as he is, but he's very, very agile. And he is one of those guys that if he has a strong week of practice against a talented defensive line in Mobile, then he could be somebody whose stock could absolutely skyrocket. I'm really intrigued because I just see a guy who is a different level of athlete playing at that level. So this is, one of those opportunities where you're going to see a small school player who might be able to kind of seize the reins, so to speak, and really make himself an awful lot of money in this all-star game capacity.
As far as offensive line prospects go, I have one big school blue chip player, and I also have a small school player. And Tate Ratledge, the guard from Georgia, is one that when you watch the tape this year, there were a few games I watched, it's like this guy does not look like a first 3 or 4 round player to me. But then you find out he's playing with a significant injury during that time. You turn on the tape before he got hurt, and this kid looks like he could maybe push for the first round. There's that good of tape. And what I love about this kid, and we're talking 6'6", 320, he's built kind of like a tackle, but you can see he's kind of a lean guy for the inside of the guard position. He's got good length. There's some physicality. He's able to set his feet and put cement in the ground against power rushers. He's been doing it against SEC competition. I think there's a chance that as long as he shows he's healthy, coming back from that injury he played through during the season, that Ratledge is a guy that could go on early day 2 in the second round. And he's a guy that could have some positional flexibility as well. As far as my small school sleeper, this may be a name that some of our listeners are familiar with because Jackson Slater is from Bellevue. He is a product of the state of Washington, and he played his college career at Sacramento State. Rob, he gave up 3 pressures the entire season this year at left guard for the Hornets. And I don't care what competition you're playing. You could be playing Division III or NAIA. 3 pressures in 11 starts is freaking ridiculous. That is incredible. And this kid, he's a little under 6'3", 320 pounds. I expected him to be sawed off, have really short arms. He measured him with 33-inch arms today, which is actually in the Seahawks threshold. That is not short-limbed compared to a lot of guys that are that size. So that was really my biggest concern, other than how is he going to handle the athleticism going against your top-tier FBS players? Because you watch a couple of years ago, Stanford was the worst game he's had on tape. Stanford really dominated him. He had 4 pressures that he gave up in that game. He had some issues with their athleticism up front. This year, though, played a couple of games against FBS teams, Fresno State being one of them. Fresno State had a couple of decent players up front, and he didn't give up any pressures in that game. So I want to see, does that traject to playing against these guys at the Senior Bowl? Because if it does, I think that Jackson Slater is a guy that can make himself a lot of money and raise his draft position this week at a program that is going to be jumping to the FBS level here in the next year or two. Sacramento State is ready to be a sleeping giant coming into the highest rank of college football. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We come back tomorrow. We've got some defensive draft crushes to watch in the Senior Bowl, and we're going to continue to take a deep dive into which players are going to be impacted the most by the addition of Klint Kubiak to Seattle staff. Make sure you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Monday. Go Hawks.